Hey there, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again on the Schiz and Giggles podcast. My name's Kody. I live with schizophrenia.
And I'm Kit Wallace, and I live with schizoaffective disorder.
And I think something important that we just both said was we live with these disorders. And that's really what we want to talk about today. So, in the last few episodes, you guys have gotten to know us a little bit. You've got to hear about how we got diagnosed, what it was like, regaining insight, how it was early on in our diagnosis. And now we get to talk about more of the, I think, hopeful and uplifting part, which is living with these illnesses. Because I don't know about you, Kit. When I was diagnosed, I was told a lot of different things that I was never going to be able to do. I was told I would never be able to work or have a job. I was told that I would never be able to build or maintain healthy relationships. I was told that I would never have a normal life. And I think everyone who told me that wasn't trying to be mean. They were going based off of what they knew about the illness. They were going based off of what TV shows, movies, and the media does to portray schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. So I want to constantly remind people that with the right treatment, medication, and support, you can live a full functional life. And I think we both fortunately get to be examples of that in our own experiences. So I would love to hear how you are kind of living your life, not just with medication, but like in all aspects, how you're trying to better yourself, how you're trying to live a healthy life with your diagnosis. But I would also really like to hear if anyone ever told you that you would have limitations, because that's something I heard a lot. And when I talk to other advocates, sometimes that's what they heard too, is that because of this illness, they would never get to do certain things. So I would love to start with you and hear about your experience with this.
So, my experience, totally different. Absolutely could not be farther from what you described. My first psychiatrist, I grew up wanting to be a doctor. That was my big thing. I wanted to be a plastic surgeon. And I had that dream. And when I eventually saw a psychiatrist, I asked him, "Can I still be a doctor with this?" And he told me, "Yes, absolutely. It doesn't affect your intelligence." And I was like, whoa. And so he kind of gave me hope that I could still do it. And spoiler alert, I actually can't. There's a whole bunch of factors that fell into play. I will never be a doctor, unfortunately. But he, throughout the entire time that my illness progressed to where it is today, I struggle a lot with cognitive issues from repeated hypomanic episodes and psychosis. And throughout all of that, he would always say, "It doesn't affect your intelligence. You can still achieve your dreams." He never, ever, ever said anything different. And my current NP, he hasn't really said anything that I couldn't possibly do because it hasn't come up. But I do remember my first psychiatrist having absolute faith in me that I could go to medical school with a mental illness. Like, that's just mind boggling to me looking back on it.
I think some people would call that blind optimism. I actually would prefer that. When I was diagnosed, I already felt like my life was destroyed. I was also coming out of jail, coming off of severe addiction. I didn't have a lot of hope moving forward. And then I had all these doubts about what I was going to be able to do. And then I had all these people telling me that those doubts were true. So that was really frustrating. It's crazy the difference actually in our
Yeah.
experiences because I think that it could also be that I had less insight than you. You did have, like we talked about last episode, you had a little more insight into not all aspects of your illness, but some of your illness. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
I think that probably came across to the medical professionals in your life. When I was diagnosed, I was literally coming out of a complete psychosis, delusional state where like I think people looked at me and looking back, I give these people a hard time for saying I wouldn't be able to accomplish things, but I remember what I was like at that time, and I can only imagine how it looked from the outside. And so it's also important to remember that, like, a lot of people with schizophrenia or on the schizophrenia spectrum are unemployed and they don't work. And so I think when people were telling me these things, they weren't trying to discourage me. They were trying to set realistic expectations. And I don't think they were realistic, especially like I said, in my case, I ended up doing really well on medication. I have done all the things that people told me I wouldn't do, but I think they were going a lot based off of what they see because one of the last statistics I saw was that upwards of 90% of people with schizophrenia are unemployed and don't work. And I mean, if you're going just based off numbers, I could see why a doctor would say that to me. He's going based off of what he sees in front of him and statistics. So the odds were probably not in my favor, but man, having a doctor tell me that I could would have been huge for me. And fortunately, my psychiatrist was like that in my life. The doctor who told me that I would never work again wasn't even my doctor, which is the craziest. That's the craziest part of that is like I was in for something unrelated to my schizophrenia. They saw my diagnosis, they saw I was still in really rough condition, and they just told me that unprompted. So I think having someone believe in me early on would have helped me probably speed up the process of, rebuilding my life and finding hope in a future past schizophrenia.
See, and it's wild to me that you were told you couldn't do things, then you achieved them. Meanwhile, I was told things that I then couldn't achieve.
it
Like, in a
it
weird roundabout way, it's like totally opposite in like the weirdest way.
it truly is a spectrum though, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
where it comes
absolutely.
in.
Yeah.
A person that I would eventually love to have on the show is his name is Carlos Larari, and he's a person living with schizophrenia who went back and became a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
Ooh, that's cool.
And
Oh, that's really
because,
cool.
well, and you haven't even heard the craziest part, because he constantly wants to show us up, he also he also just went back and passed the bar to
What?
so he could practice
What?
law. Yeah. So, and once again,
So it's
this
possible. It's
and,
possible.
and that's the thing is I think it shows this is a spectrum, and there's
Hmm.
a lot of factors that go into this because in my state, when I was diagnosed, I think I was starting on a lower playing field. I think I was starting behind most people because not only did I take several years to get diagnosed, but my life had plummeted. I dropped out of college. I had all my issues with addiction. I went to jail. So it was like, so I had all these things that it's like I didn't have to worry about rebuilding a new life. I had to first deal with all of the results of those horrible things going on in my life. And so it took a long time to get to a point of even playing field where I could actually pursue school and jobs and stuff like that. I also think it's important then to talk about like where we are today because you did get into science. You didn't get to do, doctor stuff, but you get to wear a lab coat, which I mean, if you didn't tell me, I would consider that still a doctor. If you're wearing a lab coat, in my mind, you're a doctor.
Well, it's so funny because it's embroidered, it has the script, it's got my name on it and everything. And I'm like, if I wore this to like the main hospital, like I would literally people would absolutely think I was like an MD 100%. And
Yeah,
it makes me laugh so hard. Yeah. But no, I did end up in science. I did. So I didn't expect to end up in science, but it was kind of interesting because it took me a while to realize that I could not achieve my big dream of being a doctor. Like it was, after I got out of my psychotic break, I still thought I could do it. When I started the job that I've now held for 5 years, I still thought I could do it then. But there was this moment where I realized that schizoaffective disorder, it was not going to go away. It had caused me to have lasting cognitive issues that were not going to get better. I was stuck with this for the rest of my life. And because of that, I could not handle the stress, the memory it takes to go through medical school. And so I had this one night where I just grabbed my big stuffy and I just cried and cried and cried because it was over. The dream that I had for like 17 years, all down the drain. It's done. It's over. Everything I did, and I did a lot, was all for nothing basically with it. And that's how I felt. That's how I felt in the moment.
hmm
But I decided that I wasn't going to let that be the end because for a large part of my life I thought if I couldn't be a doctor it wasn't worth being around anymore. That was a large part of my life, but I got better with that over time, which is good. So it wasn't like I was in a bad place. But I learned in that moment that I had to work with my disorder, not against it. And I realized then that I'm just like, okay, I have to I have to not fight this thing every second of the day. I have to figure out how to hold hands with it as I go through my life. And so that moment was probably when I realized that like I had to live with it, not fight against it.
I love all of that, everything you just said, and I won't spend too much time on it because I could talk about this forever. But you talked about like working with your disorder, not against it. Part of what I wrote in my book about mental health and mental illness in the workplace, I talk about that because I worked in a lot of different
Yeah.
industries, and when you're working in like all these different jobs and stuff, you're like I can do anything, and like I was finally at a point where I was like my life was coming back in order, and I was like I can do anything. I realized maybe not, maybe a guy who's having active hallucinations shouldn't also be operating a forklift. there is that possible, and that's not a joke.
What a
I actually,
concept.
yeah, I actually was doing that, and so
Oh,
like
wow, wow.
it became clear to me, and I talk about this in the book. It became clear to me that I had to do what fit for me and what worked for me, and that's how I eventually got into more like office roles, and eventually into sales, and like found jobs that better accommodated me, and like employers that, because of the role, they were able to give me more accommodations and more help. So love that you said that. I do want to address another thing you said, where you were talking about, you felt like your dream was over, and you were, grabbed your stuffy and you cried about it. I think this is a place where I heard that and I could identify so much with it. I was going to college originally to be a teacher, actually. And the unfortunate thing about my circumstances was, people have been like, well, Kody, you could still do that. Because I went to jail and got a felony, it would be very difficult for me to pursue that dream. So I also went through a period where I, felt like the one thing I wanted to do all through high school, I was like, I want to be a teacher, because teachers were the ones who saved my life in high school. Before I was ever diagnosed or showed symptoms, and I was a caregiver for my mom, I was struggling, I was a full time caregiver for an undiagnosed person living with schizoaffective disorder who was also a single parent and supposed to be the one taking care of me. So I had a lot going on, and the teachers in my life were the ones who really saved me. So I was so passionate about that. It's all I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't do it anymore. So, one of the things I want to ask you about is, I always tell people that before they can start rebuilding their life after a diagnosis, a very important thing to do is mourn your old life, because I do look at them kind of separately. Like I look at what I thought I was going to be, and I don't get to be that now. And as much as I love being an advocate and getting to talk to Kit every week, and working with you and doing this stuff, it's not what I wanted. It's not what I had planned, and that was really hard. So is that something you felt like you had to go through? Did you feel like you had to mourn your old life, or do you think you just kind of seamlessly built this, what you have now, with where you left off?
I would say that there is a lot of grief associated with it because I started wanting to be a plastic surgeon when I was 7 years old.
Oh
So
my gosh.
all all throughout elementary school, it was I want to be a plastic surgeon. What can I do to be a plastic surgeon? In high school, I was like shadowing doctors. I was trying to be well-rounded. Everything in my life was centered around that dream. I wanted nothing more than to be a doctor. And in college, it was multiple extracurriculars, getting on leadership teams of clubs, doing research. I worked in two labs at the same time at one point, and it was my life. That was my life. And so turning away from that and letting it die and just letting it let go of it. And all of that was definitely grief. And I would not say that I'm done grieving. I have moments where I still have those feelings come up, and I have moments where I still grieve it to this day. I had a recent moment actually where I was watching this anime called Emeco MD Doctor Detective. It's like a little medical mystery anime that I love a lot. And there's one episode where the main character, she's a nerdy doctor girl, and she is like treating this patient with cancer, and it's a kid, and the kid calls her Dr. Kid with a D, but my brain heard Dr. Kit, which was something
Oh,
I used to want to be called. And so I burst out crying, grabbed my stuffy again, and just let it all out. Because when it comes to grieving my old life, the life I couldn't have, the life I wanted but never got, I do let myself feel those feelings when they happen, because I think it's important not to tamp them down. But unfortunately, it sometimes happens in very inconvenient times. And so I have to like run off and cry somewhere where no one can see me. And it is really difficult. And it's gonna be I'm probably gonna still cry if I make it to 80, genuinely,
yeah.
because it's like it was such a big part of my life. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor more than I wanted to breathe, frankly, but yeah.
One, man, to have like you said, a dream at such a young age. Like, how many people
Mhm.
know what they want to be at 7 years old?
I saw a
That's
flyer for Operation Smile in the mail, which is a cleft palate charity. And yeah, it was like, I want to do that. My dad's like, you become a plastic surgeon.
that's crazy. Yeah.
And then I learned more about plastic surgery as I grew up, and I was fascinated by the reconstructive aspect of it and how you could shift people's features to be what they wanted and whatnot. And I just grew to love it from that way. But it started off with wanting to do cleft palate surgeries because I was like, I want to do that. So yeah, from a
Yeah.
young age, but yeah, there was like a little bit more of a idea there.
I also want to acknowledge how you talked about feeling those feelings, because I think when I talk to patients who are still in like the early stages of their recovery, they aren't dealing with those feelings, and I feel like it's so hard to build your new life, or what you're doing now, if you don't address what you lost, because you did lose it, you know, and like I don't think that should be ignored. I think it's more than fair to recognize that you don't have the life you thought you were gonna live. And uh for me it was like I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to make an impact on kids' lives, especially kids who were struggling or had stuff going on at home, you know, and like I wanted to be that person that those teachers were for me. Uh and it was really difficult realizing like, yeah, it's not going to happen. I had a moment for me that changed everything about like how I see myself in my advocacy role. And the reason I continue to do advocacy was in one of my very first speaking events. I wasn't like a full-on mental health advocate at the time. I was doing social media that was starting to like get attention, but I was still working a day job, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And one of the things that really flipped it was I got done sharing my story with an audience at a local college. And I talked about how upset I was I didn't get to become a teacher. And older lady stood up and she raised her hand and she said, "Hey, I just want to acknowledge that you are a teacher, just not in the way you thought." And it healed something inside of me that I can't explain. And that audience had to watch a 6'1", tattooed covered guy just bawl on the stage. And I just could not help it because I was not at a point where I was past the grieving. I think because of that, I have kind of healed from that, and I've been able to uh, move past a lot of my hurt from losing that part of my life. But you kind of still work adjacent to what you wanted to do. So like when you talked about like you're having to deal with, like you said, interns and summer students and people who are pursuing the very thing that you had to let go of. And so that's got to be challenging just in itself. And with you, like this is a part of your life. This is what you want to do. How are you finding ways to like deal with that? Because that's got to be challenging, just like to have to be around it that often.
Yeah, every summer is I dread it as much as I like having students there because they kind of they're very bright and hopeful and whatnot, and that's kind of nice to have in the lab and stuff. But the one thing that is actually kind of weirdly worked out about the whole thing is that I actually work at the medical school that I wanted to attend.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, so I have a lab coat with my name on it that
From
has
the Oh, that's so cool.
yeah. So that's like my little, oh, the universe, it all worked out in a way. And so I have that, which really does help. So I still ended up doing that kind of like, I still ended up closer than I expected to. And that's kind of what helps me sleep at night is that I couldn't get what I wanted, but I got pretty dang close in a way. And
Yeah.
so I don't struggle with it as much as I used to. And it definitely does it does help to realize that. But when it comes to actually coping with it in the moment, it's that I just feel my feelings. My therapist and I are constantly working on me feeling my feelings because I'm terrified of my feelings because they're so intense. And so she's always like, let yourself feel your feelings. Go cry in the corner if you have to. Like go do all that stuff. And so I do let myself do that. I know how to cry and not mess up my makeup. Very important life
Oh,
skill.
that is
Very
that is
important life skill. Yeah,
I
but
I've had to wear makeup just for like photo shoots and like documentaries and stuff, and I barely move my face. I'm so terrified, so I couldn't imagine trying to like cry and not. And you wear like eyeliner and I all that stuff. Oh my god.
yeah.
That's got to be impressive skill. I'm sure there's a lot of people wearing makeup right now that are listening to that like maybe we need a video on how you do that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I learned it in college when I was having all these, like, crying attacks from having my bipolar symptoms act up, so I just got good at it that way. Not a skill I really think everybody like, it's a skill that people should have, but I don't like how I got the skill.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. It's
Yeah.
probably not something you'd bring on like America's Got Talent, be like, "Hey, here's what I can do, guys."
No, could just, like, start sobbing on stage, be like, "Look, my makeup's not running, my mascara is fine."
But watch. Uh, no, I and like kind of moving past this, I do want to talk about like how we live with it now, right? So that's just part of it. Like getting through what we lost, getting through coping with what we aren't able to do. And that for both of us had to eventually transition into what we're doing now. And like we both just said, it's not what either of us expected. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think one of the things that can really get people down in their recovery journey is thinking that because you can't get exactly what you thought that you failed in some way and
Yes,
not
yes.
and without considering everything you're going through and all the symptoms you have to live with and how much harder it is to get through a single day for you than it is a quote unquote neurotypical person. And that's why I want to know more about like what are you doing now that makes you excited about moving forward and what are some of the things that inspire you, what are some of the things that help you maintain and continue building on your advocacy and your career and all the things you do.
So I love that my job is basically building foundation for other scientists to do cool things. It makes me feel very happy that I am actually making a difference for the future of science. And it's just kind of fun to go into work and be like, "Oh, what are we going to do today?" And everything I do is cutting edge. It's all cutting edge science. And it's like my boss will like ask a question and the question will become an experiment and it's an experiment that no one's ever done before, and that's just like my life day in day out is all the stuff that people just aren't doing because we're the ones who are doing it. And that excitement, it was there in the beginning, but it's grown since I've worked there, and I still get excited to go to work all the time, which is really wild given I've been there for 5 years. I'm like, should I not be so excited at this point? Like, what's going on with that? But I get really excited about my job in a way that, like, I feel is fulfilling, and that kind of carries me through stuff. And then in my off hours, being an advocate is something that I did not expect to love as much as I did. I did not expect to want to burn the candle with advocacy and stay up late writing scripts and whatnot. I didn't expect to love to do that. And so I have this dichotomy of working really hard in my science job and then being a mental health advocate in my spare time. And then both of that like just goes back and forth. And I love that life. I love what I've built with it. I wish that I could have been a doctor, yes, but I do feel like I built a life worth living, and it kind of just fell into my lap in a way.
Mhm.
And it's like once I kind of just let go of the dream, the other stuff just fell into place. And I love the life I live now.
When you said like when you gave up, what your dream was and it fell into your lap, I felt that on like a spiritual level. uh, because advocacy is not anything I ever planned on doing. And the main reason for that was when I first started advocacy, I had to stop and be like, do I really want schizophrenia to be an even bigger part of my life than it already is? Because I didn't start my journey with schizophrenia when I was diagnosed. I started as a kid when my mom was dying. My whole life has been about schizophrenia. And for me, I think one of the inspirations that led to me pursuing advocacy was peer support. When I started doing peer support, I started seeing like people were living functional lives with schizophrenia and I didn't know that that was possible, and so I wanted to try to share that with other people. And when I started posting on the internet, I was like, no one wants to listen to this goofy guy talk about
This
schizophrenia.
schizophrenic hippie.
Yeah, the schizophrenic hippie. And in no way did I even consider this an option for what my life could be. And I am so grateful for it. And I want to also talk about like how we've managed to really build on not just our work dreams, because work is a small portion of your life.
Hmm.
Even if you're passionate about it, it's just a fraction of your life. So I also think it's important to talk about like our personal lives, because one of the things I was so afraid of when I was diagnosed was that I was not going to be able to build or maintain healthy relationships with my spouse or friends and family. Thank goodness I knew my wife before my diagnosis, and I didn't have to worry about dating with schizophrenia, which is a topic we are going to talk about on another episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes.
because it is a question I know we both get a lot, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuance to that conversation. But like my life became, I got to work in jobs that I found really interesting. And even though I never got to be like a full on teacher, I got to do all of these different things that I was like found really interesting at the time. And then I moved on to new things. And then now I get to do this. And I also get to have an amazing spouse who's been with me through this whole journey. I have, my dogs that I love. I became a huge video game person, so I like that's one of my ways that I cope and relax, uh, and so I have all these amazing things I get to do in my life, and it's all because I had medication, I had peers, fa- I had friends and family members, and I had access to all the support I needed. What are some things outside of work that you love about your life that you never thought you'd be able to have, even like maybe before your diagnosis or after you were diagnosed?
So, probably my biggest hobby outside of work is that I cosplay. So,
Oh,
I
and you're so good at it, by the way. It's actually super impressive. If you guys don't follow Kit's Instagram, go check out the cosplay because it's dope. It's really cool.
thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, cosplay is like my big passion in my spare time where I pour all my money in and everything. And it's something that I don't think I'd be able to do if I wasn't on medication and in therapy and had treatment, because making a costume takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, and I have made costumes in hypomanic states before, and the lines are not straight, the stitches are not good. It's still functional, and I still have some stuff I'm really proud of. But when I went on medication that was right for me, and I went to therapy and I started working through all of my issues, I noticed that I was able to focus on my costumes in a more attention to detail level way, if that makes sense. Attention to detail level way.
Yeah.
In a way that I spent more time paying attention to the details. And so my work became a lot better, my cosplays got a lot better, and as a result, I was able to grow in that hobby as a person and stuff. And so with cosplay comes all of my friends. So a lot of my friends are also cosplayers, and so we all kind of unite under the common theme of just being a freaking nerd about our fandoms. And they support me, and a lot of my friends, they knew me before I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and before I had my psychotic break, and they actually stuck with me after that as well. So while I don't have like a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, I do have friends that I met when I was in the midst of not doing great, and then they stuck with me, and I still am friends with them to this day, and they are very close to me. We do conventions all up and down the East Coast. It's really fun.
I think, I talked about peer support and my spouse, you talked about your friends. One of the things I hear a lot from people in the early stages of, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, any sort of mental illness is the tendency to isolate, which
Mm.
in my opinion is the worst thing you can do. And people don't realize it because especially early on, you don't want to be a burden. You don't want to be, I was afraid to go out in public because I was afraid I was going to have symptoms in public. Like there's a lot of reasons why people isolate with mental illness. And I can't say enough for having people around you and what that can do to recovery, how that can help. And it's scary at first. I remember when I first got diagnosed, I would refuse to like even go outside. The first time my wife Allison got me outside was just to go for a hike. And even that, I was like, well, what if I run into someone on the trail and I'm having symptoms? That'll be so embarrassing. And it took so long to get me into a room with peer support or be able to start like making friendships again. And that's why I liked working a lot of different jobs. I made friends at all my jobs, and it helped kind of reintegrate me back into society. I also think now that I know, that you're a huge nerd, I don't think you know this about me. I am also a huge nerd. I am a comic book
Yes.
nerd, Marvel, DC. So I think what I'm hearing is Skits and Giggles attends Comic Con live.
That would be awesome. Oh, that'd be awesome.
Future plans, I'm saying that's gotta happen, right?
Manifest it. Manifest
Manifest
it.
it. No, I think hobbies are super important and they're
Mhm.
hard. When you are managing a mental illness, uh, you only have so many spoons. I'm gonna mention the spoon theory because it
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
it's so relevant to mental health, and like my wife's on the autism spectrum, she talks about it a lot. The idea is like you have a set amount of spoons throughout the day, and you have to use those spoons for certain activities, certain things, and a neurotypical person might start with like more spoons to get through the day, and that's why like people with mental illness, people with developmental disabilities, it's harder for us to do everything that everyone else does and still do things we enjoy because we get burned out super quick. And so being able to save some spoons, so to say, for hobbies and activities is one of the things that really helped me uh, with like being happy again. Like, because I was rebuilding my life and I was stable, but I was not happy early on. I was like just grinding through to try to like pay bills and get caught back up and rebuild my life, but I wasn't enjoying it. Because I didn't save time for video games or for I like Legos. I build the Lego sets. So having like hobbies and all of these things I was doing was really instrumental in me being able to rebuild my life and like find joy in living again, because I was just going through the motions without any hobbies, without anything to look forward to, and that's so draining, and it can only get you so far before you burn out and you're not able to keep up with your own care anymore.
Cosplay was instrumental to me in a lot of ways because it kind of as a hobby, it worked with me because I could work on things when I felt good and I could not work on them when I felt bad, and then if I spaced out everything, I would have everything ready before the convention and I'd be ready to go. And having like I've been cosplaying since 2015. So I've been cosplaying for 10 years this year. So, which is wild to me that I've been doing it that long. But it it kind of helped that even though I was feeling bad, I could be alone with my thoughts, but I could work on a costume. I could spend hours sewing or doing some other detail, hours painting if I'm working on an armor set, that kind of thing. I can do all that stuff. And it's just like, it was always there for me from 2015 onwards. It's always been there for me. And like, I'm obsessed. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. And I hope I continue to be obsessed with it for a very long time, but it's like, I think the reason it lasted as long as it did was because I was able to, like, have it there with whatever stage of life I was in.
So I guess before we wrap up, I want to know if there's any tips or any suggestions you have for other people who might be diagnosed and just getting to a point where, they want to start pursuing things, being around people, they want to start finding some normacy to life. Is there anything you would recommend to listeners? Anything you wish you knew earlier yourself?
Get out and try new stuff. I know that sounds super cliche, but if you get out there and do something new, you never know how much you're going to love it if you do love it. I started cosplay because one of my friends was like, come to a convention with me. And I'm like, people dress up. Okay, I got to make something to dress up. And it turns out it just, like, now, I'm obsessed with cosplay. So that's how that started. And I do a bunch of other stuff too that's also creative. And I started all that because I took a class or my dad got me to try something new and whatnot. And so I have a lot of interest because I've tried a lot of different things. And so I really want people to, like, whether it's sign up for a class at like a local art school or go to some, I don't know, a reenactment event of like history and whatnot, just like trying to like attend things that expose you to new experiences can maybe turn you on to something that you might not realize could be a new obsession. And that obsession could bring you joy, which could then make you more content and happy in your life and give you a life that you believe is worth living.
And I want to also go off of that and talk about the importance of being around people, building relationships. I think both building relationships, being around people, and trying new things, like Kit said, can be really intimidating, especially if you're newly diagnosed. You might still be dealing with stigma. You might still be too nervous to be around people. Start small. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Uh, there are so many ways to express yourself or be around people. If you're trying to ease yourself back in, I highly recommend online peer support groups, online hobby groups. There's all sorts of things you can do just to test the water, because it is a scary thing. It is intimidating, especially if you're like me and you were worried about, experiencing symptoms in public, or people judging you because of your illness, stuff like that. I really can't say enough about being around people who understand what you're going through, being around people willing to learn about what you're going through, friends, family, whoever it is. And if you have no one, there are people out there who would love to talk with you, who would love to hear your story. And if you have to be online to find them, if you have to venture out, whatever it is, you will find your people. And that's so important, I think, in healing and starting this life and getting comfortable with surviving through an illness like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder.
You will find people. I know it might seem like there ain't nobody out there who gets it, but I can tell you from experience there are people who get it and you will find them.
And before we go, I can't say enough about understanding that it's okay also after your diagnosis to acknowledge that friendships might be different. I actually have some friends still from when I was diagnosed, but I also lost some friends who weren't willing to accommodate me or understand my illness. And I really think that's okay. I think it's okay to know that people who aren't willing to educate themselves or understand might not be the best for you trying to live a full life with your illness and be surrounded by people that understand. So I wanted to know if that is true for you, or if you have any people that were in your life at the time of your illness, if you're still friends, because I hear a lot about that, people getting lonely after losing friends due to their illness or what they were going through.
Some of my closest friends that I still have to this day that I met in college, I met them my senior year of college, and I had just come back from the Philippines and I was in a mixed state. So I was experiencing symptoms of hypomania and depression at the same time. And I was going up and down. I was crying at the beginning of a sentence and laughing by the end of it. It was very all over the place. And I was introduced to these people that somehow still wanted to hang out with me, even though I was like off the rails. And so I got better. I got out of the episode. I got better. And they were like, yeah, no, you're cool. You're cool. And I'm like, what on earth is going on here? This is not how this is supposed to work. And I've stayed friends with them since then. That was all the way back in 2017. It's 2025 now. So we're still friends to this day after college and everything. And while we don't talk every single day, we still do play like Dungeons and Dragons together and keep up with each other and whatnot. And that's like kind of wild to me that I met people and I was in a really, really bad spot and they somehow still wanted to be friends with me and they've stayed friends with me through the entire time.
Yeah, and I think that also goes along with what I said. Like, maybe not everyone in your life is willing or ready to work with you on your illness, but in my life, the people who stuck around, I've been able to rely on and really work with. And the people who did stick around were people that were willing to learn about what I was going through, willing to help me in my journey. So I relate a lot to that as well.
So, to wrap up this episode, I think we need to reiterate that learning to live with your disorder is not a simple task. It has multiple facets to it. It involves hobbies, it involves relationships, it involves other things because life after being diagnosed with a severe mental illness is different for everybody. And so, having hobbies, having relationships that are fulfilling and help you. That is how you learn to live with a severe mental illness, how you learn to live with a severe mental disorder. And there's a lot we weren't able to cover in this episode because these episodes are shorter than the hours long conversation that we could possibly have about this topic. But if you have any insights that you want to share with us, do shoot us an email or reach out on Instagram. We are skitsandgiggles@gmail.com and skits and giggles on Instagram. And wherever you have listened to this podcast, do rate it, follow it, do all that good stuff. We would be super grateful if you did all of that. And as always, know that the brain is a minefield and we brought flip flops.
Have a good one, guys.